Welcome to today's brand origin deep dive. You've heard of their products. Maybe you even use one every day. But do you know how a shared anxiety in a dimly lit basement and the low hum of outdated machinery sparked a revolution that changed the world? It's a story steeped not in glamour, but in the raw, unvarnished reality of creation. If you find value in this kind of storytelling, consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps more than you know. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's dive in and discover how it all began. You are standing at the threshold of something forgotten. The air is thick, carrying the faint scent of dust, ozone, and something metallic and old. This isn't just any basement. This is the crucible, the literal ground floor where a titan was forged. You trace the condensation dripping down aged pipes overhead. The only sound, the slow, rhythmic pulse of the building's core. You've come searching for answers, buried deeper than server racks and tangled wires. Not the polished history, but the raw, vulnerable truth of what it felt like to build a world-changing entity in dim light and shared anxieties. You feel the weight of forgotten ambition, of tireless hours poured into flickering screens, of ideas whispered in the dark that would ripple across the globe. This is where the code began, where the decisions were etched not just into silicon, but into the very soul of a brand. And as you step further into the gloom, a low, persistent hum starts to rise. The first symbolic thread, the sound of early computation awakening, hinting at the powers stirring beneath the concrete. Building on what came before, you now descend into the actual origin point, the basement. The air thickens with the scent of dust and aging circuitry, a far cry from today's sleek, climate-controlled labs. Here, amidst discarded prototypes like a forgotten tech graveyard, you uncover the physical remnants of the brand's messy, iterative birth. This wasn't a clean whiteboard session. It was a workshop fueled by desperation and ingenuity. The symbolic hum persists, joined now by the phantom click and whir of machines long silent. The focus shifts to the intense, isolating environment of the founding team. You witness the grueling hours etched into the very walls, pizza boxes piled high, sleeping bags tucked under makeshift desks. Creative clashes were common, born from exhaustion and fierce conviction, shaping a pressure cooker atmosphere that forged early decisions. A lesser-known struggle involved the core data compression algorithm, internally codenamed Project Chimera. Early versions were notoriously unstable, frequently corrupting data or causing catastrophic system crashes during testing. This wasn't just a technical bug, it was a relentless morale killer, pushing the team to the brink of abandoning a foundational element. This struggle was a major turning point, forcing a brutal pivot in their coding approach and delaying launch by months. The emotional shift was palpable. Fierce determination battled profound self-doubt as lines of code refused to cooperate. Analysts continue to question the reasoning behind prioritizing raw speed over stability in those initial Chimera builds. It's a quirky detail, imagining these brilliant minds wrestling with code that literally ate itself. Foreshadowing hangs heavy in the air. This level of intensity is unsustainable, hinting at potential burnout and future conflicts among the founders themselves. Welcome to today's brand origin deep dive. You've heard of the product, but do you know how a forgotten warehouse accident and a colorblind designer reshaped its global image forever? We're peeling back the layers on an icon, exploring the messy human moments that forged its identity. from the spark of an idea to the global force it is today. If you find value in this kind of storytelling, consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps more than you know. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from or what you think is the most defining moment for this brand. Let's dive in and discover how it all began. Building on what came before, the brand took its first bold step into the market, a move that felt less like a launch and more like a quiet revolution. Their initial product, the Byte Box, wasn't a splashy consumer device. It was a niche piece of industrial automation hardware. Yet, hidden within its utilitarian casing was an elegant, self-correcting algorithm, a minor miracle of early code optimization. This proved to be a major historical milestone, establishing a reputation for understated reliability and clever engineering in a nascent industry. The Byte Box quietly began appearing in factories and labs, a workhorse nobody celebrated, but everyone depended on. A quirky, lesser-known detail from this era involves the product's unexpected popularity with academic researchers. Apparently, its specific output format accidentally made complex data analysis slightly easier, a feature never intended by the designers. Analysts continue to question the reasoning behind limiting production initially, speculating it was either supply chain jitters or a deliberate strategy to build mystique. The air around the small startup offices felt electric, a low, steady hum of servers and whirring fans promising future potential. The steady hum of early success began to mix with a distinct, rhythmic clicking sound, perhaps the ghost of a teletype or an early keyboard in distress. This is where you witness the interface of doubt, a key moment of early identity crisis that could have fundamentally altered the brand's path. It centers around a brilliant but perhaps too early concept championed by Elias Thorne, a junior engineer whose quiet intensity belied a radical vision for user interaction. Thorne envisioned a dynamic, almost organic interface, a far cry from the rigid command lines of the day. He poured his ideas into Project Chameleon, an alternative software design where programs would visually morph based on user context, predicting needs rather than just executing commands. It was innovative, confusing, and ultimately deemed too ambitious, too strange for the market or the available hardware. His vision was ignored, marginalized in favor of a more conventional, text-based approach. The brand core element here is this: road not taken, a tangible representation of early strategic uncertainty. Artifact description. Tucked away in a dusty, forgotten filing cabinet is a faded, internally circulated memo from late 1980. Its cheap thermal print is yellowed and brittle, the ink slightly smeared in places, smelling faintly of ozone and old paper. Titled Project Chameleon, Alternative Interface Proposal, the memo outlines Thorne's radical software vision, complete with crude, hand-drawn flowcharts attempting to illustrate the concept of adaptive visual states. Its dissenting ideas are clear: a rejection of linear interaction in favor of a system that learns and adapts, a vision deemed impractical and financially non-viable in margin notes scrawled in different hands. The sensory details immerse you in the aesthetics of early computing interfaces, the sickly green or amber glow of long-dormant CRT monitors, the texture of period documents like Thorne's memo or crisp dot matrix printouts, and perhaps the static charge hovering in the dry air of the lab. The emotional shift within the company centered on internal division, creative frustration for Thorne and his small team, and the first real market resistance encountered when early simplified demos of any non-standard interface confused potential customers. This period was a major historical turning point, forcing a critical decision point about who they were building for and how. Brand historians still debate whether adopting even elements of Thorne's vision could have leapfrogged competitors or doomed them to an early failure due to complexity. Foreshadowing points clearly to the difficult choices ahead and the compromises that success would inevitably demand. Navigating away from that internal friction, the brand made a decisive pivot, choosing the more pragmatic, if less revolutionary, path for its next major release. This decision, a direct consequence of the doubt explored previously, led to the development of the Logic Board series, a set of modular components designed for system builders. This proved to be a significant historical milestone, moving them from niche products to becoming essential building blocks for a burgeoning industry. It wasn't as glamorous as a consumer device, but it was profitable and stable. A quirky, lesser-known detail: the initial batch of Logic boards had a silkscreen error that mislabeled a key port as flux capacitor, a small internal joke that somehow made it to production in a few thousand units before being corrected. Analysts continue to question the reasoning behind prioritizing B2B components over a finished consumer product during this critical growth phase, debating if they missed an early window. The rhythmic clicking began to subside, replaced by the focused hum of assembly lines and the steady thrum of freight trucks. With the stable foundation provided by the Logic Board series, the brand entered a period of rapid expansion and refinement. They doubled down on their reputation for reliability, becoming synonymous with infrastructure rather than innovation in many minds. A surprising twist for a company born from such experimental roots. This phase saw them acquire several smaller component manufacturers, integrating their technologies to create more comprehensive solutions. A major historical turning point in their scale and market position. You see their logos appear not on desktops, but inside other companies' machinery. A quirky, lesser-known detail involves their surprisingly elaborate internal cafeteria system from this era. Legend says it was designed by an engineer obsessed with logistical efficiency, featuring color-coded trays and optimized queue flow that felt more like a factory line than a lunch spot. Brand historians still debate whether this focus on industrial scale stifled later consumer-facing creativity or was a necessary step for survival. The soundscape shifted again, now filled with the distant drone of automated systems and the efficient whir of cooling fans in server farms. The brand's consistent, behind-the-scenes presence eventually coalesced into a powerful, if subtle, form of cultural impact. Their components became the invisible backbone for everything from early internet infrastructure to medical equipment, touching lives even when their name wasn't on the box. This widespread integration represents a major historical turning point, solidifying their place as a foundational tech provider rather than a trendsetter. They weren't selling excitement, they were selling dependability, a less celebrated but arguably more critical commodity. A quirky, lesser-known detail from this period is the internal code name for their next-generation processor line, Project Phoenix, a nod to rising from the ashes of earlier, less successful ventures, showing that the memory of past struggles lingered. Analysts continue to question the reasoning behind never fully leveraging their underlying tech for a breakout consumer product in later years, pondering if they became too comfortable In their B2B niche, the symbolic hum is now everywhere, integrated into the fabric of modern life, quieter but ubiquitous. As we wind down our journey, take a moment to reflect on this brand's path. We've seen the spark of an idea, the quiet build of early success, and the profound moment of doubt where a divergent path was considered and rejected. We've explored the pragmatic pivot that followed, the steady growth fueled by reliable infrastructure, and the eventual, almost invisible, integration into the world around us. The key takeaways are clear. Success is rarely linear. The roads not taken are as much a part of a brand's story as the path chosen, and sometimes, quiet competence is more impactful than loud innovation. Their long-term legacy isn't built on flashy products or charismatic leaders, but on the fundamental, dependable pieces that make modern technology possible. The cultural symbolism lies in being the essential, unseen player, the foundation others build upon. The lessons learned echo through the tech world, identifying your core strength, navigating internal conflict, and making tough, strategic choices define a brand's soul. And maybe, just maybe, the soul of a brand is never in its product, but in the people, stories, and stumbles that shape it. Building on the initial shared dream we explored, you reach a point where the humming wasn't just busy, it felt discordant. The quiet of the boardroom feels heavy, thick with unspoken words and competing visions. This wasn't a debate, it was a chasm opening. The founders, once inseparable in their pursuit of pure innovation, find themselves at a brutal fork in the road. On one side, the path of relentless technical perfection, potentially niche, but true to their roots. On the other, the highway of mass adoption, requiring compromises for commercial viability. This moment is the brand's true binary divide, a core split that would ripple for decades. The rustle of important papers feels less like progress and more like the tearing of a shared fabric. As the argument escalates, then abruptly ceases, the resulting silence is louder than any shout, heavy with the pain of watching a foundational relationship fracture. A quirky, almost heartbreaking detail from this time is a handwritten note from one founder to the other, found years later, simply asking, "Is this really us?" Analysts continue to question the reasoning behind the final decision made under such duress, debating whether the pivot towards commercial scale was genius or a betrayal of the original soul. The once steady symbolic hum and clicking now feel erratic, a panicked beat mirroring the company's internal turmoil, foreshadowing immense growth, but also the potential loss of that initial pure spark. As the growth explored in the previous phase accelerated exponentially, propelling the brand to unprecedented global recognition, Section 5 reveals the architects of absence. This is the turning point where outward success creates its own negative space, leaving behind something intangible from those cramped basement days. You see it in the stark transition from the makeshift workspace to the gleaming, impersonal towers of the new corporate headquarters. The original camaraderie, that sense of shared, scrappy purpose, begins to dissipate, replaced by distant echoes and the monotonous drone of thousands of keyboards. This rapid scaling up, a major historical milestone in itself, often marginalizes the very individuals or ideas that fueled the initial spark. Perhaps it was the lead engineer who insisted on an overly ethical sourcing standard, or the marketing intern whose quirky, humanizing campaign was deemed not scalable for the global market. Grand historians still debate whether this loss of core identity was a necessary cost of ubiquity or a strategic misstep that hollowed out the brand's soul. A quirky detail from this era? The company briefly experimented with a culture consultant whose main recommendation was simply to add more colorful beanbags to the office, a stark illustration of how superficially the cultural shift was sometimes understood. The basement's symbolic hum, once a resonant frequency of shared belief, begins to fade, drowned out by the general white noise of a massive segmented corporation. A melancholy sets in, a reflection on what was gained, yes, but more profoundly, a questioning of the true price paid for reaching the top. This period foreshadows a complex, ethically gray legacy, built on the foundation of forgotten stories and compromised principles. You return to the present, the echoes of the brand's origins now resonating in the ubiquitous digital landscape. That humble basement, likely long sealed or repurposed, seems impossibly distant. Yet, its beginnings reverberate in the sleek interfaces you navigate daily, the devices you hold, the very infrastructure of our interconnected world. It feels like a fundamental historical turning point, the moment raw ambition met nascent technology and cracked open a new reality. You ponder the individuals involved, the legendary founders, yes, but also the forgotten early employees, the brilliant concepts discarded along the way, the internal conflicts that shaped key decisions explored in earlier parts of the story. Analysts continue to question the reasoning behind some of the early strategic pivots, debating whether the brand's current, often overwhelming iteration is a true fulfillment of that original basement dream, or something vastly different, perhaps even unrecognizable to its earliest architects. There's a poignant detail in considering the sheer volume of rejected ideas, whole futures imagined and then scrapped. The symbolic hum and click from those foundational days are no longer distinct, mechanical sounds. They've become integrated, perhaps woven into the very fabric of the digital noise we inhabit. The constant, subtle whir of a nearby server farm, the silent background processes of your operating system, the countless, tiny transactions happening invisibly every second. This narrative isn't a simple ascent to triumph. It's a complex tale of vulnerability, rapid adaptation, and the enduring, sometimes unsettling power that can emerge from the most unexpected places. It leaves you with haunting questions. What other foundational secrets lie buried beneath the polished surface of familiar global brands? What was truly gained in that dizzying transition from a makeshift basement office to a global empire, and what, perhaps irrevocably, was lost along the way? The answer, much like that persistent low-frequency hum, feels both everywhere and nowhere, a constant presence you sense but can't quite isolate. And maybe, just maybe, the soul of a brand is never truly in its product, but in the people, stories, and stumbles that shape it.